Today's world runs on connectivity. Keeping up with friends and family and building businesses that thrive all depend on the availability of internet and telecommunication services we can count on. That's why we're committed to expanding and sustaining robust broadband access in rural communities across the country. We are America's small broadband providers. We serve the most rural communities, and we're leading the charge to invest in technologies that will connect even more smart rural communities with resilient digital infrastructure. We help our neighbors sustain all the places that rural broadband providers are proud to call home. From Alaska to Maine, North Dakota to Texas, on Main Street, country roads, and all kinds of places in between, we're working for broadband. We're working for rural America.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chief Executive Officer, NCTA, the Rural Broadband Association, Shirley Bloomfield.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's really a treat to be here with all of you today. And there is an adage that says, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So I thought by showing that video, we actually took it up to 1 terabyte to share with you a little bit of the companies that I represent and why I think they're such a critical part of the ecosystem and the infrastructure as we talk about how we're going to continue this expansion of broadband across this country. I really appreciated Avi's remarks. I'm probably going to take this up to a little bit of a higher level, maybe to a cloud level, as we look at how this partnership ecosystem really is going to be critical as we look at some of the challenges before us when we talk about the fact that there's probably 24 million people in the United States alone who don't have connectivity. So I think there's ways, as we talk about partnerships, that we can really create win-win situations, not only for the providers, other utilities in the space, but certainly for the communities who are looking for service. My father was a big fan of Aesop fables, and so for nighttime stories, we couldn't do anything that didn't have a lesson connected to it. So I'm sure a lot of you remember the story about the ant who actually industriously worked all summer long to harvest food so that he wouldn't go hungry over the winter time, and the playful grasshopper who actually played most of the time and actually did suffer because of that. And the moral of the story was, make hay while the sun is shining. And one of the things I want to share with you all today is the sun is truly shining on rural broadband at this point in time. Folks are really focused on what it's going to take to support and to expand building this critical infrastructure so we can bring all of these amazing services to people across the country. You've got folks who are economic development specialists, policymakers, community activists, all very focused right now at this point in time on how we accomplish this. Ronald Reagan once said the 9 most terrifying words were, "I'm from Washington, D.C., and I'm here to help." I would share with you that I actually am both, but I actually really sincerely mean that I think there's a lot that we can do right now as we continue to tell the story of all of the amazing things that so many of you in this room are already doing. I also want to share that this is a time where I really think we need to think bigger than ourselves. There's so many opportunities for this country to find ways to collaborate, to create different scope and scale, generate partnerships, and get creative about the ways that you're actually expanding some of your networks. How do we actually reach some of these unserved and underserved parts of our country and some of these consumers who are just so hungry for the technology that you have to bring? And not only that, I would also contend these folks are the best business opportunities that you might have. They're new business opportunities. It's new ways to generate some revenues. I also think it helps you, as we've been listening in this conference, ways to position you to be the facilitator of Internet of Things technology and to actually own the consumer experience. So that leads us to who's actually in this ecosystem. It's a pretty big toolbox. I think one of the things that we've all learned is it's going to take just about every kind of technology to get the job done. I get to go ahead because I actually represent ILECs. I'm going to go ahead and say that I see the ILEC industry as the foundation. These are carriers that had last resort obligations they were traditional telephone companies, and they pivoted really quickly to become broadband providers, very fiber-rich, future-proof networks that they are out there building. I also would say Inditel and the state fiber networks that fall in under the ownership of some of these independent companies. You also start to look at cable providers. There's WISPs. There will always be a place in this country for a fixed wireless solution in some of these areas that are very difficult to serve. Municipalities that are hungry for some of the service for the consumers that live in their communities. And then you've got electric utilities and electric co-ops. There's a lot of folks in this space, and frankly, to get the job done, we're going to need everybody kind of working together and figuring out how to create some different synergies. I would also throw out there's a lot of organizations. There's groups like UTC, like NRECA, like Smart Cities. There's folks that are out there like the Fiber Broadband Association. And I would also say that there's folks like Calix, who I think have been terrific partners and working with us about what is going on in the industry, what are some of the pressure points. One of the things I've always appreciated about Carl is he reaches out periodically to say, what's happening? What are your folks thinking? What does CapEx really mean to them in a world where universal service constraints are actually getting pretty severe? But hopefully we will have some relief in short order on that one. So, like a tale of two cities, I think there's truly a tale of two rural Americas. And I would contend that there is truly a rural-rural divide, not so much a digital divide, but a rural-rural divide. And I think the sooner that we're honest about this, the sooner that we can actually figure out ways to bridge some of that. You've got a rural America on one hand, where you've got providers that are community-based. You know what? They live, they work in the community, their kids go to school, their parents are aging in place. They're very focused on medical care because that's what attracts top talent employees to come into those areas. And they know that the economic vitality of the communities they live in really depend on the technology that many of you in this room actually deliver. And that's why so many of them have embraced our Smart Rural Community Initiative, actually being designated as Smart Rural Communities, showing that the broadband that you're deploying is actually used for amazing things. We also have about 60 of these Smart Rural Communities across the country, and we have about 170 gig-certified communities as well. I would contrast that with the farmer on the other side, who's waiting for his DSL connection in southern Illinois to actually connect so he can do his livestock sale. And we all know that all these things in real time make such a huge difference. So, we've got a world where you've got larger carriers, many of them who are under incredible competitive pressures in markets where, frankly, the rate of return and the rate of investment is extremely high. So the idea of putting some infrastructure and money into high-cost, low-density areas becomes kind of a failing proposition. So I think if we as a country are really, truly committed to thinking about those 24 million unserved people, I think now is the time to step back and to say, what are those resources that we'll be needing? How do we come together and look at this? How do we do better mapping? How do we find more resources? How do we get more creative about some of those solutions? So that's one of the reasons why I am actually very bullish about partnerships. I think that ways to bridge this divide can really depend on folks coming together. So I kind of go back to one of the rules that we all had in kindergarten, which was learn to play well with one another. So I would share with you that I think this is the time to get out from behind the desk, start connecting with those in your community or in your state who might complement what some of your weaknesses or some of your challenges might be. Who can come to the table and actually create some interesting synergy with you? We actually created a web portal recently that was called Partners in Broadband. It was something that I have daughters in their 20s, so I am unfortunately way more familiar than I would like to be with online dating. But we consider this a little bit of a way to, if you're afraid to pick up the phone or you're feeling a little bit awkward, I'm always struck by the number of my companies that I will talk to, and I will say, do you know your counterpart? Do you know your counterpart in another utility? And how few people actually seem to bridge some of that. I really encourage you to again, get out of your office and think about who actually can be part of that partnership with you. So one of the things I thought would be really helpful is just taking a minute to share some stories, because frankly, I think stories sometimes actually help put some of this into context. I've got a couple of companies noted here. CTC up in Minnesota actually has been working with Millex Energy for the last year or so. Millex actually got some money from the state of Minnesota to do a fiber build in their service territory, And they reached out to CTC, who already had a collaboration agreement on way with an electric co-op to do a lot of the provisioning and telephone service and broadband operation. So the two have gotten together and have actually created a really interesting partnership. CTC sells on a wholesale basis access to Mil-X energy, and people are actually getting broadband service for the first time. Up in Wisconsin, we have citizens who actually, through some marketing calls into an area they were looking to CLEC, accidentally got the general manager of the electric cooperative on the phone, and he said, if you're thinking about building broadband in this area, let's do it together. So they formed a CLEC. They are sharing their resources, they're sharing their staff, and they actually are also providing a video product and doing great things for people who had no service. And I'm going to put out Wabash Communications in Illinois as somebody who gets probably the most creative points, because they reached out to their local water utility and said, how much would you charge me to actually put some fiber in the ground? And the innovative CEO of the water utility said, you know what, I think we can do this together. They are now doing a dual investment, building fiber into unserved areas and providing broadband for the first time to thousands of people. So each of these partnerships that I've noted drives market momentum and best practices in broadband deployment. There's spirit of collaboration all across the country. New York, Georgia, Oregon, Tennessee, anywhere where people are starting to have some of these conversations. But I also think it's a time to be wise and to be thinking about using these limited resources very wisely. Overbuilding rural utilities in high-cost, low-density markets simply doesn't make sense when we have so much work to do as a country. I think one of the things that's kind of a myth in Washington, there's actually probably a number of myths in Washington, but one of them is that it doesn't take resources to get the job done when you don't have a customer base, or you have a customer base where the density might be 4 subscribers per mile, and in Washington, D.C., it's usually noted to be 400 or 500 people per square mile. So how do we do this in a way that, folks are either using universal service, or they're using their rights of way, or they're using pole attachments, or they're using their weight base, or they're using local bonds? I think all of those tools have to be put into place. So I truly know that I'm preaching to the choir. When I talk about what is the power of broadband, you know it, you live it, you breathe it, you're doing it yourself. We know that broadband is the #1 economic driver for the 21st century. We know that services like precision agriculture are just coming online, and they're going to be powerful. We know that as autonomous cars become even more frightening and prevalent, who owns that fiber is going to be controlling where that goes. Public safety, things like aging in place and telemedicine, and certainly enabling our next generation to become world leaders and to learn from their home. I also think, honestly, that this clears the path for you to own the consumer experience. So one of the things I want to do today is I want to leave you with a challenge. I'd like to challenge each of you to be thinking about whose strengths, whose facilities, whose consumers actually complete you. Who can be the yin to your yang? And I'd love to see you set up discussions and see where you can take it, because quite honestly, the future depends on all of you. Thank you for all you do.
So Shirley, I loved hearing all of the stories about the different partnerships. Can you tell me, what is some of the commonalities you see with the successful ones?
So Teresa, a couple of the things that we find when people actually get together and a collaboration works, the first thing I would say is check the egos at the door. It's not about who's going to win. It's about coming in and finding something that you share a common goal on. And that common goal, hopefully, is to serve folks either in the community that you live in, or the community nearby, or a community that has a need. The other thing that I would say is, be clear, be transparent. Be very clear about what each party needs to get out of that partnership. What are they looking for, and how do you make that work, and how do you do that up front? And who's going to own the customer? Who's going to do the billing? Get all of that taken care of and out of the way. And the other thing that I would say is, I'm a big fan, again, Aesop fable, if you don't first succeed, try and try again. So I think these things take time, and I would say be patient, but be persistent.
That seems like great advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you.